Hi folks, welcome back to the Soil Health Assessment video series. I'm Brian Doherty, Ag Engineering Field Specialist with Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. And the topic for today is decomposition. So you can see we've got a bit of a different view here. We're out in a cornfield. So I've been monitoring this spot during the summer, so I'll show you some photos of earlier in the year, and then we'll take a look at the surface residue now and kind of see how that's decomposed over the summer. That's one way that you can assess decomposition is just looking at your surface residue. There are several other visual methods that you can use for assessing decomposition. There's the tea bag test where you can bury some tea bags and see how they degrade over time. Another really simple one you may have heard of is called the Soil Your Undies test. So luckily for everyone, I did not bury my underwear, but I did bury some t-shirts earlier this year. So we'll dig those up and take a look at those and see how they decompose during the summer.
We're here in a cornfield, as I mentioned. So this field had first crop alfalfa taken off in late May, and then corn was no-tilled directly into that, and then that was terminated later on. So you can see in this first photo, you can just make out the corn coming up. So that was taken on June 15th. And so it had just been terminated with glyphosate. It's Roundup Ready corn. So you can see that residue starting to break down in that photo. Still good amount of surface cover there. And so we'll take a look at the next photo here taken on July 17th and see how that residue breakdown is occurring. The second photo here, again, is taken in the same area on July 17th. Now you can see that most of that original alfalfa that was terminated, that's since died back. You can see a few weeds there, but still a pretty good amount of residue cover in this photo. You can see some larger pieces of residue still laying on the surface that haven't broken down yet, but the biological activity is starting to work on that. So if you've got a very biologically active soil, you should see that residue disappear pretty quickly. So there's always a trade-off. You want to keep your soil covered, but the more biologically active your soil is, the quicker that residue tends to break down and disappear, which is what we'd like to see is to have that higher level of biological activity. So now we're back here on September 17th, and again in the same spot. So we'll take a look at the surface here now. So again, you can still see some of this original residue here, but pieces are smaller, more of that's broken down. One thing you can look at, as I mentioned in one of the earlier videos, is evidence of shredding or chewing by some of your larger beetles and different organisms. You can pull some of this aside and see if you can find some macropores from earthworms. Sometimes they'll create little middens over those earthworm tunnels, so you can take a look for that. But in general, what we're trying to do here with the visual assessment of the surface is just try to monitor it during the season and see how quickly that residue is breaking down. Again, good indicator of how much biological activity you have. If your soil has very low activity, then that residue will tend to hang around for a while. If you've got continuous corn, you might find corn stalks from 2 or 3 years ago if your soil's low in biological activity.
One interesting thing to note when you're looking at decomposition is the amount of variability that you might see from one field to the next. So this picture was taken in a field just adjacent to the one we were just looking at. They're the same soil type. They were managed the same way, planted and terminated on the same dates. You can see considerably more residue left on the surface in this particular spot. And so when you're doing these assessments, again, that's just a good reminder. You're going to want to check several areas, within fields, or check several different fields just to get a good idea of a good average of what your decomposition is looking like. Now we'll move on to another method of assessing decomposition. Earlier I mentioned the Soil Your Undies test. So the general idea there is you bury some cotton fabric in the soil, and that serves as a food source for the microbes. So they break that material down over time. You can bury those in different areas to compare decomposition rates from different fields. and get just kind of a general idea of what the biological activity in your soil is. So what you're seeing in the photo here is the area where I did this on May 27th. I buried a t-shirt in the grass buffer strip. You see along the fence line on the left there, and then also one in the field on the right hand side. So here's an image showing the setup. So I use chicken wire to put underneath the t-shirt. It just makes it easier to retrieve it later in the season, makes it easier to find it and dig it up. You'll definitely want to use some sort of material under it, or maybe put it in a nylon bag, or at the very least mark it with a flag so you can find it later in the season. Otherwise, it can be very difficult to retrieve that material. This is showing the t-shirt buried in the cornfield, so placed about 2 inches of soil over top of that t-shirt and then wrapped the wire mesh around and underneath it so I can retrieve it later in the season. Now you can see on September 15th I've uncovered that material, and so you can see the amount of degradation that occurred there over about 3.5 months, and you can see the advantage of having that chicken wire under there. That t-shirt's basically completely decomposed at this point. Here's a closer up image of that, and you can see all that's left for the most part is just the stitching around the seams of the t-shirt. The majority of that cotton material has been digested and decomposed by the soil microbes. Considering this field was tilled in the spring, there's pretty good biological activity here. So this is a dairy farm. There's a long history of corn, alfalfa, and rotation. It does have a lot of dairy manure applied, and so that does help with the biological activity. But if I was going to score this on a 1 to 10, with 10 being very biologically active, I would probably put this in the middle to upper range, maybe a 6 or a 7 on biological activity. Here's the t-shirt that I uncovered in the grass strip along the fence line. So this would be what we would kind of use for a reference condition. Should be very biologically active soil, minimal disturbance there for probably decades, perennial vegetation on that. So we would expect this soil to be very biologically active. And compared to the cornfield, there's not a lot of difference here. So pretty good biological activity in the cornfield.
So that's all for the video on decomposition. I'd like to thank everyone for watching the soil health assessment video series, and good luck on your soil health journey.